The 16th Quality Cafe session on audit documentation and completion of audit file. We are thrilled to have you all here on this Saturday morning to delve into this essential aspect of the audit process. Audit documentation is the foundation of any audit engagement. It is not only vital for compliance, but also serve as historical record of the audit process, findings and conclusions. So accurate and comprehensive documentation help auditor maintain professional standards, ensure accountability and provide clear evidence of the work performed. So not taking so much of time, now I would like to hand over the mic to CA Vishal Doshi sir, Convener Center for Audit Quality Directorate for necessary proceedings.
Very good morning, and I welcome all of you to this wonderful Saturday morning. This is the first Saturday after the peak audit season is over, and we thought that members would definitely be available to participate in this important topic of audit documentation. And we have a galaxy of panelists today, and I would thank them for accepting our invitation and to address and interact with the participants today. So we have CA K. Raghuji, our respected past president of ICI. We have CA Sanjay Vasudevaji, past Central Council member of ICI, and CA Vijay Manyarji from Mumbai. We also have CA Sripriya Kumarji, deputy convener of the CAQD, and I would say a huge support for the initiatives that we are taking at the CAQD. CA Karuna Bansaliji, the secretary, and the whole team at the CAQD. I am very much delighted to welcome you all to the 16th Quality Cafe session on audit documentation and completion of the audit file. And it is a pleasure to have such a diverse group of professionals who have gathered today to explore this crucial aspect of the audit process. The topic that we are going to discuss today, like I said, on audit documentation and completion of the audit file is very important in the field of auditing, and especially considering that we have just closed the audit season. And audit documentation and completion of the audit file are not just essential components of our profession, but also cornerstones upon which the reliability and integrity of the audit process are built. Throughout our time together today, we will explore the intricacies of audit documentation, examining the best practices, challenges, and strategies to ensure that our audit files are complete, accurate, and in compliance with the highest professional standards. We will also discuss some of the latest developments and emerging trends in this vital aspect of auditing, and especially the use of technology and the digitization as far as the audit documentation is concerned. From the CAQD, I would like to share that SA 230, it provides extensive guidance on audit documentation. But before we proceed, I would like to share with you that the CAQD has come out with an Excel utility, which is a review and monitoring tool for the standards on audit compliance. So this tool, it provides a dashboard for the review and monitoring of the status of compliance of each of the standards on audit. And as we all know, the standards on audit is mandatory for the auditors, and it is a very, very important tool that we have launched at the CAQD. And in this document, even we have provided a convenient link of the standards on audit and their implementation guides wherever they are available on a single click. So they are all hyperlinked so that the technical material is also easily and readily available to the members. We have also given broad and illustrative indicative goals that are to be accomplished for each of the activity relating to this tool. Detailed checklist for each standard is separate, and so I would say that it is a reference of working papers for effective documentation. I would request all of you to actively participate in our discussions, share your experience, and ask questions. We would be asking your questions also to our esteemed panelists today. And this session definitely, like I said, is designed to be interactive, and your insights are invaluable in enriching our knowledge. Let us remember, I would say, from the CAQ that our commitment to quality, transparency, and accountability is the bedrock upon which the public trust in financial reporting rests. And through our discussions today, I hope we can further reinforce our dedication in upholding these principles. So without taking much further time, let us embark on this journey of exploration and learning together. Thank you once again for your presence, and let's make this Quality Cafe session on audit documentation and completion of the audit files a truly enlightening experience. Thank you from all of us here.
Thank you, sir. Now I would like to request Sri Priya ma'am, Deputy Convener, Center for Audit Quality Directorate, for her opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Karuna, and to Vishal Doshi ji, the convener of the Center for Audit Quality Directorate, a role that I think he's performing aplomb, and I'm normally not one of those very ready with compliments, but I must mention that Vishal bhai truly takes his job extremely seriously. I mean, and I know it with the kind of number of mails we get every day. And it's an absolute pleasure and delight to work with somebody who's very serious about audit quality. And it's a very nice coincidence that not only is he the convener of this directorate, but I also think in a very rare combination of circumstances, we have somebody who's a thorough auditing professional. So it really helps that he brings a lot of his own practices, whatever he has developed in terms of best practices, etc., and he contributes them to the institute. To Raghu sir, past president, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India from Bangalore, the technology man who sort of significantly moved ICAI from a non-tech era to a tech era, and I think a lot of that credit must go to him. Say Sanjay Vasudeva ji, very, very eminent, exemplary, and a distinguished past Central Council member of the CA Institute. Again, a man who's very thorough and on his subject matter. CA Vijay Maniyar ji, whom I've had the opportunity of interacting with in the past. Again, a very exemplary professional. And pardon this long introduction, but I think it had to be done because these are people who have contributed significantly to what this institute today is. So coming about, and I think the theme that we're talking about is sort of perfect because we finished our audits and the standards on auditing give us time, I think 60 days to assemble the audit file. You can't perform any additional procedures during this period, but what you have performed, you can ensure that you assemble them well. So audit is all about expressing a true and fair opinion. And what does true and fair mean? It means compliance with an applicable reporting framework and a confirmation that the financial statements are free from material misstatements. So in this process, the management gives you a set of assertions and says, my financial statements are here. And we as auditors perform audit procedures, different kinds of procedures, substantive compliance, analytical procedures, again, reclassified as inquiry, confirmations, recomputations, reperformance tests, etc. Why do we perform these audit procedures? Because we are required to express an opinion. So at the end of all your procedures that you perform, etc., you're supposed to document them. Why do you document them? Because they serve as audit evidence. Why do you need audit evidence? Because you're presenting an opinion. Today, when you're presenting an opinion, you need to have a basis and an evidence for that opinion, and hence the need for audit documentation. And I think in terms of the institute, we've given so much guidance, and that's something I really appreciated about what Vishal bhai is doing. He said, we have so much of what to do in the institute. We've published checklists, we've published guidances, we've published implementation guides, we run these webinars. But today, maybe there is also a problem of plenty. There's a lot. So we decided in CAQ that this year, our focus will be on how to do it. And I will just take 1 minute to explain. And again, a lot of us are very focused on accounting standards, but they are the responsibility of the client. Our responsibility obviously hovers a lot more on standards on auditing. And it's a bit sad that we have not embraced standards on auditing as much as we should have embraced. And why standards on auditing? Standards on auditing are something like a brake in a process. Now today, why does a car have a brake? And this is a very old analogy. Everybody says you have a brake to stop the car. No. Actually, the objective of the brake is to make your car go faster. So in that sense, your standards on auditing are like brakes because they help you to do an audit really fast, effectively, efficiently. It just says use this as a brake to understand, this is how you should do it. I think it's a slightly old analogy. I think today your standards on auditing are like your navigation systems. They tell you what to do. They also tell you what not to do. And the standards on auditing also provide for course corrections. How do you perform additional procedures? When do you communicate with those charged with governance? So I think it's a whole thing that's encompassed here. We'll just take 1 minute to show you this review and monitoring tool that Vishalji spoke about. And I was actually presenting when he was speaking, but I think he was on a different screen. So Vishalbhai, would you want to just run through this for just a minute before we start? Or may I continue?
Yeah, you can continue, please.
So this is the cover sheet. So this is a very simple tool. For every standard on auditing, we have given you this is the objective sheet, which clearly tells you why you will benefit by using this template. This is the details, and this virtually becomes your audit working paper. And this entire thing was the brainchild of Vishalbhai, and all of us have just managed to, fit it in. But I think the original theme came from him, and I think it is really good, especially for a small and medium firm. See, it's one more checklist that it will take you about a day to fill up, perhaps a day to understand, but it provides you long-term protection. These are indicative goals. So what we have also done is all the standards on auditing we have taken, and we have said, why do you do something? You do something which is said in the standard, but the same thing that you're supposed to do is covered differently in different standards. So we have synchronized it to the goals. So for example, if you take SA 200, we've put out the entire standard for you. We've also very briefly told you why you need to perform that particular task which is set out in the standard. That's your indicative goal. So there are about 38 standards on auditing, and of course there is an SQC, and these are we have created about 62 broad goals that you seek to accomplish in an audit process. So what do each of these sheets tell you? They give you a serial number. They give you the content of the standard itself. It gives you a working paper reference. It gives you comments. And this is automatically mapped to your dashboard in terms of compliance, non-compliance, and your indicative goals get scored. Now, one thing I mentioned was audit evidence. But more importantly, today, I think as a profession, we seem to be more open than ever. We've got NAFRA, we've got the CA Institute itself in terms of our disciplinary mechanism. We have FRRB, we have peer review. Today, it's not just what you have done, but I think a document like this, and thanks to Vishalbhai, once again, although I sound very gushing, I think it's also how you display your professional pride. When I finish doing this audit and my article has done this and comes to me, I think it gives you a completely feeling beyond even a fee recovery. So thank you very, very much for this opportunity to present this, Vishalbhai, and thanks to everybody who's on this program, and I hope you have a very, very fruitful and a meaningful session here today. Thank you.
With this, now I got the opportunity to introduce our expert panelist, our past president, CA K. Raghu sir. He was our past president in the year 2014-15 and fellow member of the ICI with more than 24 years of professional standing. He was also elected as vice president on 12th February 2013 for the year, and he was member of the Central Council from 2007 for 3 consecutive terms. He was nominated by Ministry of Finance as an independent director. He is a former board of director of the International Federation of Accountants, New York. He was also a member of Audit Committee of the International Federation of Accountants for 2015. Welcome to you, sir. Your word of wisdom will definitely be enhancing our knowledge. Now I would like to introduce our past Central Council member and AASB Chairman, Sanjay Vasudeva, sir. He has an extensive experience of more than 25 years in the accounting profession in areas ranging from statutory audit, internal audit, Companies Act, and FEMA. He has over the year worked with clients across different sectors, including manufacturing services, banking, and finance. He has also advised exposure of auditing and accounting standards, including Ind AS, having been involved in formulation of such standards, their practical application, as well as overseeing their implementation. He is currently a governing body member of the Foundation for Audit Quality. He is currently a member of National Executive Committee of Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, FICCI. Welcome to you, sir. Now I would like to request our next panelist, CA Vijay Maniyarji. He is a fellow member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, having more than 35 years of professional experience. He is engagement partner for statutory audits of large listed as well as unlisted Indian, multinational, entrepreneurial, fee-funded corporate, including those which undertook capital market transactions. He has extensive audit committee board meeting experience, having attended more than 400 meetings. He has been a special invitee on Accounting Standard Board of ICI for 2 years. He is a member of Accounting and Auditing Committee of BCA's Bombay Chartered Accountant Society since more than 15 years. He is a regular at various forums. So with this, welcome to you, sir. And this panel discussion will definitely enhance the knowledge of our participants, and they'll be getting the queries of their answers. And we are receiving queries. We have started receiving queries. So for that, I'll be handing over the mic to convener CAQT Vishal, sir. He'll be taking over this session. So over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Karunaji, and thank you, Sripriyaji, for your kind words about me. But let me tell you, and Raghuji and Sanjay would agree, being in the council, that it is the team that works. So, we normally say it is the team works. That is what happens. And though we might have thoughts and ideas, but ultimately the implementation of that is with the team. And having you as a deputy would definitely, it adds a lot of value. So now, starting with Raghu sir, our past president and a tech person, as he has been introduced. Your opening thoughts on how emerging trends such as data analytics, artificial intelligence, blockchain, we are talking a lot about these nowadays, but how these are shaping the future of audit documentation and its role in auditing, sir. You'll have to unmute, sir.
Good morning, all the participants. Thank you, Vishal Doshi, for having invited me to this program. Let me compliment all of you, yourself, and Sri Priya, the convener and deputy convener for the Center for Audit Quality, because it's a very good initiative of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India to start a center focusing on how we can assist our members to improve the audit quality, how they can enhance the quality of audit documentation. An excellent initiative. I would like to compliment you, Vishal. The quality cafe, the word that you have coined, is very interesting, because today the cafe culture has become very popular across the country. Whether you go to Pune, whether you come to Bangalore, in a city like Bangalore, you will be surprised at the number of cafes that have opened up. And Sripriya was discussing with this morning, even in Chennai, the word cafe has become a rage. And very nicely you've coined the term quality cafe. And I'm sure this program will be very useful to all the members as to how important it is for us to maintain adequate audit documentation. Sanjay Vasudevji has been a former council member, done extensive work on setting up this auditing standards board, implementation guides that have been published, and I'm sure his knowledge and Mr. C.A. Vijay Maniyar's knowledge would add value to the whole discussion. And of course, Karuna Bansali has been giving an excellent support to this particular center. Friends, having said this, I can only say that audit documentation is something very important. And today, with the digital transformation, for all of us to sort of understand as to how we could digitize our audit documentation, because today we are performing audits in more challenging environments. When I qualified as a chartered accountant in 1990, I still remember audit documentation. We used to give a lot of importance. Everything used to be physical. We used to keep a permanent file and, something like a temporary file, keep all the deeds, contracts, invoices, important working papers, spreadsheets, expert opinions, and whether, all this would be part of the permanent file and the temporary file, which still continues. But those days in 90s, we never had the computers, we never had digitization. But today what is happening is that the whole audit process is going through a complete change, I could say. The kind of digital transformation we are seeing, the kind in which businesses are being run today, everything is technology enabled. You take a company like Amazon, which sells, every second there are thousands of transactions happening. And there's a payment gateway that has been interfaced with the most of the e-commerce platform, whether it's Flipkart, whether it's Amazon. And the auditor is supposed to do an online audit, a sort of a 24/7 audit. They don't expect you to do a periodical audit. And today, the new technology companies, the e-commerce companies in the retail space wants audit firms to carry out a 24/7 online real-time audit. So when you're doing an online real-time audit, the dynamics of audit documentation would change. Vishal Doshi just said that, yes, we have completed tax season and we have just finished the company audit, and it's time for us to organize our papers. Very rightly, Sripriya said, it's time for us to organize our working papers, ensure that all the necessary documents that is required way forward for us to ensure that we have done an audit properly. We have the time to assemble all the audit documentation. But today, with the scenario changing, the expectations of the clients changing, the way accounting is happening on the cloud, the way payment gateways are being are integrated, you as an auditor is supposed to carry out an audit, not only for regulatory purposes under the Companies Act, the Income Tax Act, we do the tax audit, but more from a compliance perspective. Most of the new technology companies, the new age companies wants an audit to be done from a governance perspective. They want to ensure that everything is proper. So what really happens is that when you are conducting an audit in such a scenario, it's quite challenging, and you need to adopt new audit documentation tools that are available in the market. Today, it's easy for us to build our own audit documentation tools. You can, Sripriya showed us just now how a simple Excel spreadsheet that has been designed can help you to understand whether we have complied with the accounting standard, whether the entity has complied with the auditing standards, whether the firm has followed all the goals that are required, the essays. But what would happen is, when I was a member of the International Federation of Accountants, a global accounting body, having all the CA institutes as members, I was served on the board for about 3 years. And I was also a member of the audit committee. We realized that when we did a survey about the level of audit documentation in most of the geographies, we found that the level of audit documentation is inadequate. Even a country like India, we found that especially among the small and medium practitioners, the quality of audit documentation is poor. And when we did a survey in IFAC, we realized, yes, there's a need for us to strengthen audit documentation. Every professional body around the world should focus on building, helping members, assisting members, create utilities for them. And today, a lot of ready softwares available that helps chartered accountant firms to build audit documentation. You can have your own simple Excel utilities also. But what is very important for us to keep in mind is the changing way in which, because ultimately documentation is the same. Whether it is 30 years back an audit is conducted, an audit conducted today. Only thing, the size and nature of the entity might be different. The operating conditions today are different, and today the use of technology is different. And I personally believe that it's absolutely essential that it is essential for us to digitize audit documentation, because it's no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. And one thing we need to keep in mind when we are trying to build a digitized audit documentation today, what is important is that we need to keep 4 things in mind. Number 1, we need to have a centralized document repository. You have an audit team performing in Pune, an audit team performing in Bangalore. You have the audit partners reviewing from Mumbai. So there'll be a collaborative approach. So we need to create a central depository, document repository, where access is possible by anyone in the team, whether it's the engagement partner, whether it's a review partner, whether it's a signing partner. Because when you talk about audit of listed companies, you have the concept of the engagement partner, and then the review partner and the signing partner. And you have a whole lot of people involved in the audit. Everyone needs to have access to this. So first important thing in digitization of the audit documentation is that there should be a centralized document repository. Quick access should be available. If Sanjay Vasudeva is the engagement partner, he should be able to access the audit documentation instantaneously. If I am the signing partner, I should be able to access the documentation instantly. That's very important. There should not be any data loss. We should ensure that the repository that is created doesn't permit any data loss. And of course, this should be a cloud-based collaboration, because without a cloud-based collaboration, it will not be possible for everyone in the loop to access documentation. And Boxfile is a good software for file sharing and then collaboration, editing, everything. I think this is something which you could think of using. And one more thing you need to keep in mind is that tracking any changes that is taking place in audit documentation should also be tracked in the software. And Finally, security. Security is because you're dealing with confidential data. Information should be extremely secure. So when you're digitizing document, audit documentation, you need to ensure that it's accessible, it's secure, it's not manipulated, and it's very important that today, the age in which we are using computer-aided audit techniques, and if you look at forensic audits also, you will be dealing with huge volumes of data, where running into so many thousand, maybe lakhs of line items, and you perform a forensic audit. There's a need for you to ensure that the audit documentation that is required for you to back up your forensic audit is properly maintained. So what is important, friends, is that yes, audit documentation is required. Regulators require it. When you talk about regulator, it's the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, the CA Institute. CPA very rightly said, we have the FRRB, PRB that comes to your office and examines your audit documentation. When it comes to PRB says, boss, this documentation is not adequate. Please strengthen it. Please improve it. When it comes to FRRB, they find that audit documentation inadequate. They will take action against you and refer it to the disciplinary committee. When it comes to the disciplinary committee, having been a member of the disciplinary committee, having been the chairman of the disciplinary committee when I was a president, I've sat through many disciplinary proceedings and some of the high-profile cases which the institute has decided, whether it is Satyam, whether it's Global Trust Bank. I had the opportunity of sitting through this, and one thing which came to my mind very clearly when we were examining these cases, when we were looking into the documentary evidence, we found that in most of the cases there's absolutely poor audit documentation. We might feel the small and medium firms are not in a position to maintain it, but let me tell you, friends, even the big multinational accounting firm is not able to build the audit documentation that is required for them to convince us they've done a good quality job. And in most of the dispute proceedings, when we asked them for this document, when we asked them for various evidences, let me tell you frankly, we had a lot of excuses given by them saying that the documentation is lost, there was a fire that has happened in the office, some of the files were missing when we shifted the office. So a lot of reasons used to be given. But way forward, what would happen is even National Financial Reporting Authority is planning to come out with a locker where you can put all your audit documentation on the locker. And once it is, put it, you lock it, you don't try to access it or tamper it. So these are all the developments taking place. And globally, I think with way analytics and then artificial intelligence tools available, there's so many ways in which audit documentation can be accessed and retrieved. And way forward is exciting, and it's essential for all of us as practicing chartered accountants to ensure that our audit documentation is adequate, accessible, secure, and we're able to convince the regulators, whether it's the MCA, whether it's the CA Institute, whether it's the FRRB, that everything is fine and we have done our job properly. This is what I would like to say, and I would like to maybe add some more points during the course of the panel discussion. Thank you very much, Vishal Doshi.
Thank you very much, sir, for your opening remarks. I would say you spoke about tools, you talk about digitization as a necessity in today's time, and especially with the volume of papers that we handle nowadays. Without digitization, and you stressed upon a centralized repository, that becomes very important, because even in a digital form, sir, we have seen that people feel that digitization is storing a file on the hard drive or on the cloud. But, the file naming, the retrieval, people don't think beyond. And at times we find still that members or in their offices, they're still grappling to retrieve old files and documents because of not having proper SOPs, I would say, with respect to digitization. So thank you, sir. And definitely, I know you would cover all these aspects in the time to come. So one thing I always say when it comes to audit documentation, and maybe for the sake of repetition, please pardon me. But sir, whenever I interact with members, I say that when we go for an audit, there is an accounting entry which is passed. And on that accounting entry, we always ask the client the backup paper that you are claiming this amount to be debited, this ledger to be debited, this to be credited. So now you show me the documentation with respect to that, the purchase order or the voucher, the LR, invoice, all those things we ask, and then we confirm that whatever entry has been passed is appropriate or proper. So on a very similar note, when I relate, so in our audit report, we certify that we have audited as per the standards on audit. So just drawing a corollary from there, sir, I always say that now consider that you are the client and somebody comes to your office for an audit. They pick up an audit report where you have certified that you have done your audit in accordance with the standards on audit and have done all the compliances with respect to standards on audit. Then please show me the documentation with respect to such a certification or such an entry that you have passed in your audit report. And therefore, we would also be required to show all the backup papers relating to such a language or such a confirmation that we are carrying as part of the audit report. So I would say that just put yourself in the shoes as if you are the client now when it comes to your audit report, and you will also have to show all the documentation relating to it. So with this, we move to Sanjay Vasudevaji, again, an expert in audit and who has also chaired the Auditing and Assurance Standard Board. Sir, can you just guide the members on the challenges and pitfalls that auditors face when documenting audit work?
Thank you very much, Vishal Bhai. And at the risk of repetition, I must compliment you for taking this initiative, you and Shipya and Karunaji. Really happy, and audit and audit quality is very close to my heart. So I'm very, very happy to be associated, and great work which you're doing. And it's always very tough to speak after Raghu sir. The techno, he's the real technical wizard to say. But I'll try my best. I have a presentation. Karunaji, would you be able to share that? I'll quickly run through that just to give a perspective. So what I will attempt to do is in the next 5-7 minutes, just quickly, So just to give a perspective about the standard, and then come to the challenges and pitfalls. So these are my understanding about the.
Screen is visible, sir?
Yeah. So you can go forward. Yeah. Please go to the next slide. Yeah. So what is audit documentation is important, just to get a perspective. It's, the record of procedures performed. You've done control, you've done substantive, you've done physical verification, whatever has been done. And what is the evidence you obtained? You could have, looked at, vouchers, you have invoices, you have physical inventory records. And then what is the conclusion which has been reached by the auditor? So that's the summary of what audit document is. It sounds simple, but as we've already seen, it encompasses so many things within this. Can you move to the next slide, Karunaji? Move to the next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah. And these are called working papers or work paper. And so what's the objective of this standard? Is that it again serves a record and the basis for auditor's report. Vishal Bhai, you just mentioned, and now after the amendment in the auditing standard for report, the earlier standard never had a reference to the audit procedures, but now it has a reference to whatever audit procedures you've done. It talks about, having, the auditor has obtained sufficient appropriate audit evidence. It also talks about misstatements being below the materiality threshold. So you conclude there. So all that has to be documented. And then obviously it provides an evidence of, that compliance of professional and regulatory requirements. The other, benefits of documentation is that it assists the engagement team in planning, documenting, directing and supervision is simpler, because if whosoever is reviewing and we look at the engagement partner, EQCR, the team manager and all, it facilitates that. There is obviously evidence of audit, planning and how it has been done. It also assists in internal, as per SQC1, there's an internal quality control apart from what the EQCR has to do. It obviously defines accountability, who has done what, and also who has done, has signed off and is aware of what they have done. In continuing audits, you record matters of continued significance, which you can refer to in the next year. And obviously, it provides you a basis for the conclusion of your opinion, which is modified, unmodified, whatever it is. And very, very important now and always is to assist in external inspection. Raghu sir spoke a lot about, the external inspections. And so that's also very, very important, because if you have not documented then external inspection, cannot be done effectively. We can move to the next slide, Karunaji. Karunaji, we can move to the next slide. Yeah, and these are quickly some examples of audit documentation. There could be audit programs, checklists. There are your tests which you perform, evidence, analysis of evidences, issue memoranda where you noted down discussions of significant matters, and could also be external evidence like confirmation letters or letters from attorneys or lawyers, engagement letter, management representation letter, and minutes of meetings and correspondence. So these are some of the examples of audit documentation. We can move ahead. And so essentially the objective is that, the audit documentation standard talks about the documentation has to be done in a manner to enable an experienced auditor to conclude that the audit has been done in accordance with the professional standards. So these are some of the aspects which one needs to look at in documentation. We can move ahead, Karunaji, and I'll come to some specifics and then try to link it to. Thank you. Next slide, please. So these are some of the aspects where definitely, what documentation has to be done. So there are, significant matters where there's exercise of professional judgment. So you have an evidence, let's say there's an ECL, which you're looking at, there's a management estimate. So where there is professional judgment required, matters that give rise to significant risk, there could be revenue, which there is a risk of fraud. There could be related party transactions. Then results of audit procedures where there could be material misstatements. So you've done an inventory count and there are some gaps. You need to document that. So these are some of the aspects where definitely, or you have a difficulty in applying audit procedures. You've not been able to obtain confirmations. You've done alternative procedures and possible situations which could, give modifications to audit opinions. So these are some aspects where auditors need to be really, really, clear and aware that these are matters where documentation is definitely required, but substantial, it requires a lot of focus by the auditors. Next slide, please. And continuing on this, professional judgment, there could be matters on law, going concerns. Going concern is an aspect where there's a lot of assessment to be done in terms of future cash flows and fraud risk. So this is something which requires documentation. Authenticity, where authenticity of a document is in doubt, and where there are subjective judgments. So you have a document, but there is, you're not aware that or you're not sure whether it is authentic or not. So just this summarizes the standard, and obviously we'll talk more about it. Now I'll come to some of my thoughts on what could be the challenges which the auditors face. Next slide, please. We can skip this slide. Yeah. Yeah. So I think my sense is that we are used to doing audit in a certain approach. And I've been speaking at various forums. Larger, companies, larger firms have still streamlined the approach of doing audit and documentation in accordance with the standards, following a risk-based audit approach. But what I see typically is that audit and documentation are two different sets. So audit is done on a balance sheet approach. Yes, you understand, you have an understanding about the entity and you've carried out, you ensure that the numbers are correct. But the flow of audit does not happen in the manner in which it has to happen as per the standards. There has to be a plan, there has to be risk assessment, there has to be assessment of the risk, and then the response to those. You need to see if there are controls, you need to see, the extent of substantive procedures which are required. So these are some of the challenges which are there. So my sense here is that, and for that I must really compliment the CAQ, the institute, the AASB for bringing out so many different guides, checklists, and all. So once we start doing the audit in the manner in which it is envisaged by the standards, the documentation happens automatically. The documentation has to happen concurrently. Yes, there are team and staff issues. There are, in fact, if you look at some of the examples which are given in the educational material, also, there are aspects which are mentioned. There's a illustration given that there is an audit which has been completed, but the team then went on a tax audit, and thereby the audit could not be done. So these are some of the things which I think firms, mid-tier, the larger, smaller firms all face in terms of team and staff issues. Obviously, there's time is limited. You have deadlines. You're moving from one deadline to the other. Staff is moving from one to the other, and then you also have this appreciation from the client. Now that the auditing standards are part of the law, so the compliance of the auditing standards is as much responsibility of the entities as well as the auditors. So there has to be an open communication before the audit. There has to be a audit opening meeting, audit planning meeting with the clients. There has to be a complete transparency in terms of the information and the manner in which it is required, the timing in which it is required, and for this staff training, the use of technology, use of audit documentation software, these will go a long way in helping firms to go past these challenges. And what are some of the pitfalls? If you go to the next slide, so one would have seen Kanuj, if you can just go to the next slide. So these are some of the recently NFRA has come out with a number of orders, and some of the things which they have pointed out. Please stick to that slide, please. Yeah, sorry. So I was talking about going concern. Now, what they have said is that there is a going concern. There's no going concern assessment which has been done properly. There's a letter which was obtained representation just one day before the audit was signed off. Future cash flows have not been assessed. It's not been documented. So how did the auditor really arrive at the conclusion that the going concern assessment was okay? And obviously the company had going concern challenges. Then on the EQCR review, they've pointed out that there's just a checklist which has been just a tick box approach. There is no assessment being done by the EQCR at every stage. There is an assessment to be made. Inconsistency in documentation. Previous year work papers have the dates or the year have not been changed. They have been brought forward. There is so these have been copied from the last year. On risk assessment, again, there is no documentation on record. On the ICOFR opinion, expected credit loss, no assumptions have been challenged. There's no documentation on record. So if the move past the challenges, we have regulators coming down and telling us whether these are listed companies or unlisted companies, pointing out to us where and asking questions in terms of how the conclusion was made. So the bottom line is, if it's not been documented, you've not done the procedure. And to explain, as Raghuji said, it's been, whether it's large firms or smaller firms, really to explain how the audit process was done would be very, very difficult. So I'll take a pause here. Thank you very much. I hope I've not exceeded my limit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sanjay bhai, for that wonderful presentation to give an overview about the audit documentation and especially the challenges and pitfalls that auditors face. You covered some of the examples also of audit documentation, what is to be documented, and more important, the documentation with respect to professional judgment. That would indeed be very helpful for our members. My question, or I would request Vijay bhai in his opening remarks to please share about the steps and considerations that are involved in completing an audit file. Like we said, we've just completed the audit season. So from now, what the members are expected to do, or the audit firms practice units are expected to do, from completing an audit file, final review procedures to archiving, retention policies, etc. Over to you, Vijay bhai.
Thank you, Vishal bhai, and good morning to all. for the sake of repetition, I may also want to say the kind of work which CAQ has been doing. I've been associated with CAQ since past few years, and I'm aware of the effort which the CAQ team is making to ensure that the audit quality is, improved. Uh, Having said so, my take on, why, we need to reinforce this auditing standard. If we go back, all the standards or most of the standards are very old. Now, this documentation standard is about, it's there from since 2009, right? I don't think anything has changed. Why do we still, despite this, need to, reinforce these standards? All the participants are CAs. And my experience, when I'll try to leverage my experience in whatever discussion we make, the idea is that we have not made auditing interesting. If there is a client issue and there is an accounting issue, client is a real life, issue, we'll burn midnight oil. And this I always repeat, we'll burn midnight oil to find solution for the client. We don't even document during the daytime, forget the midnight oil, of what we have done, why we have done, what was the issue, right? What was our observation? What is the technical guidance? It's only the documentation of why we have burned the midnight oil. We are very lazy about it. And hence, and so one is that laziness, number one. Number two is we are not explaining to our, interns and juniors why we are doing what we are doing. If we can explain to them the rationale behind what we are doing and why we are doing, the rationale for filling all the checklist, it will, it remains on the paper, it remains the checklist. The junior most, person in the team will just put the tick mark without even understanding, and he gets bored of those tick marks. And then when he becomes CA, he also does the same thing. So if we change our mindset and understand the rationale, because this auditing standard, if it is being done, though it is theoretical, but if it is done in the manner in which it is expected to be done, it's very value accretive. There is lot of learning if we apply the same standard in one company to another company, same industries, different industries. The kind of knowledge and experience if we have with this consistency of applying auditing standards, I think that will go miles in our getting a lot of values out of it. So having said so, as I said, this is an old standard. If I were to read the standard, what do I need to do and what I can do as an auditor to in those, completion of the file. So what we do is normally, delete and discard, and this is all theoretical. And then I'll tell you practically what, one has to focus on certain areas. But the idea is that, discard whatever is the unnecessary documentation, correct? If there is a cross-referencing, collating any, work papers which is there, please do it. Sign off on the completion, all, checklist or Excel tool which has been there. I think lot of this Excel tool needs to be completed prior to the sign off of the financial statements. Of course, this will give us a reference point, but lot of this needs to be done as and when the work is completed. But something, the idea is that once it is signed off, there is no audit work is done. We should not be doing any audit work once the date of sign off is kept, and hence only administrative work is done to ensure that the file is in proper shape. As I said, this is theoretical. Practically what one should do, first of all, just go back, because when we plan, what all things we have decided we will do, right? And there is a document, planning document. If you don't have, you should have, because that is where, that's a basis of and the planning document remains live till it is signed off. So that document, please ensure that whatever is documented in that document, it is there in the conclusion document. Whether we call it a summary of issue document, or whatever issues. So whatever is our completion document, all those what we had planned to do, those is documented, that what was the outcome of what we had planned to do, and what is the result of those procedures, and what is the conclusion. So that is number one. Please ensure, because I've seen a lot of times we plan to do one thing, whether important or not important, that is not getting reflected into the completion document. Secondly, just run through all the critical documents once again. And by critical documents, I would say the financial statements, right? Whether they are, it is supposed to be signed on the date of the audit report, but practically it signs few days later. And hence, please ensure that all read those financial statements, everything very, very carefully. Uh, and from the experience, and Sanjay ji mentioned that past years carried, work paper gets carried forward, it's exactly on the dot. Are there those documents current documents? Are they we have not copy pasted those from the past documents. One more experience, when we have to give key audit matters, and we write lot of things in key audit matters. Please align that whatever is mentioned in key audit matters is also documented in our file, that what kind of procedures we have done to address this key audit matter, because this key audit matter should be there either in the planning document or in the conclusion document, and with all the auditing procedures have we documented those matters. The next is letter of recommendation. Have we included all the items? Just don't copy paste. Lot of things I know it gets copy pasted from the last year, but each year is a separate audit. Each quarter is a separate audit. Each quarter has some or the other nuances. Whether letter of recommendation is of the current year, and all the matters which we had based on which we have signed off, all those matters are included. Very important is, there are key risks, and if we see even the NAFRA observations, everyone looks at what is the risk of material misstatement, and we have to document what is the risk of material misstatement and how we have addressed them. Just run through those papers, what we had planned, why we consider, for example, revenue is by default fraud risk. By default, one will have to do more work. Have we done all the items which we had identified as the key risk? And just run through those documents. So this is based on the documentation for the closing. I'll also tell you some of the hygiene which one needs to look at. Delete all the unnecessary documents, because nowadays with ERP we get the dump. The dump has lot many information which is not used for the purpose of audit, because we may be requiring certain some information, and client may give us the dump. In the dump, if any information which we have not used, please note that this is the information we have not used, we have used this. Please hide the file if that be the case, or hide those columns, because there could be some linking. But make sure that you document what you have done, and ignore and what you have not taken on for the purpose of this, designing. Please make sure that that information is not as a part of our audit which is there. If it is electronic sign offs, make sure the partner signs off the last, or the EQCR signs off the past. In that process of changing or any of the documentation, because in the electronic version, if there is any change which is being made, this will clearly be displayed that there has been a change after the sign off. So make sure that those sign-offs are being done properly, and ultimately the key documents where the partner needs to sign off, that sign-off is there. So those sign-offs are there. If it is physical document, then partner sign-off is there on all the key documents. The next is even one of the NAFRA observation which Sanjay ji mentioned. One is to ensure that there is a proper time which is being charged. And what NAFRA is looking at, is there involvement of the executive involvement? So, if we were to say manager to partner, is there enough time which is being, devoted by them on the engagement? And one of the way to demonstrate is the time sheets. So is there a time, and the timesheet should be done on the time, during the time, but ultimately the overall time for which the execution and supervision has been there. So is there enough executive time charged on the engagement, and more importantly on EQCR? Because a lot of times, I'd noticed that EQCR time may not have been captured, though EQCR has spent time on the engagement. So make sure those time is charged. If we have taken the time of any expert within the firm, whether that expert has charged the time on the engagement. So make sure that these are the hygiene issues which one needs to take care. As far as the retention and archival is there, so as Sanjay ji mentioned, it is 60 days from the date of sign off. Now 60 days is, it is said it is normally 60 days. My experience is 60 days is there. The issue is that it actually overall takes longer time if we one were to do later, because the engagement team will move from one audit to another audit. And I'm sure, these are the, those will be the critical times where one cannot spend time on archival. So make sure that how the staffing is taken care, because if it is the archival is done immediately after the sign off, then overall it takes lesser time. But if we wait till 60 days, those people may be on other engagement, those people may be on leave, and the archival gets into a challenge. Retention policy is, it says 7 years from the date of sign off. However, one needs to be also mindful that if we are signing a subsidiary company and parent company sign off is at a later date, keep that in mind while determining the retention policy. Or that if those records are required for any other purpose, make sure that those are taken care while ensuring that 7 years time frame is there. So that's it from my side, Vishal bhai. If there are any questions in and around this, we can take it now or later.
Thank you, Vijay bhai, for covering important aspects of documentation, and especially with respect to the risk of material misstatement, and you focused on the hygiene issues, which are very important, especially when we are talking about the audit file completion. Now we'll move to some of the questions for the panelists, starting with Raghu sir. So sir, the first question to you is, what factors would influence the form, content and extent of the audit documentation?
Yeah, Vishalji, basically, the content and the form, the extent would depend on the size of the entity, the nature of the entity. And the auditor should use his judgment in deciding as to how you should go about building the audit documentation. And very rightly, Vijay bhai said that this is a process that should happen on an ongoing basis. Let us say the audit starts a few months back, right from the day one. The team should be trained to use, let us say we are using an audit software, the team should be trained to use the audit software. We should also try to tell them as to why we are building this audit documentation, what is the expectation of the regulators, what is the expectation of the stakeholders, and the need for them to build the documentation on a daily basis. Let us say the audit team has carried out certain tasks. Audit team consists of 4 or 5 people. They need to ensure that the software they're using to build the audit documentation is updated on a daily basis. If that is done, I don't think it is required. You require 60 days to tie up all the loose ends after the audit is over. And very rightly, Vijay said that most of the times once the audit is done, the audit is over, season is over, we depute the staff to other audits. They're on leave, examination leave, and as a result of which this gets delayed, and people tend to postpone and things might go out of hand. So what is important is that we need to ensure that we train the staff, have a good audit software, and try to see that as an ongoing process, this thing happens from day one the audit is started. And by the time we're able to achieve 90% of what is required when you sign off, I think that is fine. The 10% can be built up maybe after the sign off is done. So basically, what I find is, even in concurrent audit of banks, we have seen many cases, there's absolutely no documentation. Statutory audit of bank branches. I've seen cases where, when we ask them, do you have a copy of the financial statements attested by you? The CA was, saying, no, I don't have a copy. So to this extent, the documentation is poor. The chartered accountant who was attested the financial statement of a public sector bank has not maintained a copy of the financial statement attested by him. So that is the level of documentation we find adequately inadequate, absolutely inadequate. When they're doing a concurrent audit of a bank, they're expected to have so much of documentation. But when you ask them, can you provide this documentation? This is a fraud that has taken place. What is it you have done to discover the fraud? There's absolutely nothing you get from them. So documentation becomes very critical right from the time audit starts. It should be kept in mind. And as I told you, the only way I look at it is that the team should be trained, and if they are able to do it, I think we'll be able to build the right kind of audit documentation. So each audit firm should decide for each engagement how they should go about building the content and the extent in which they have to build audit documentation, because it differs from client to client.
Right. Thank you, sir. Sanjay bhai, Raghu sir mentioned about documentation depending on the size and nature of entity. Talking of the smaller and the less complex entities, are there any relaxations, or what would be the audit documentation requirement in such cases?
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you for the question. Yeah, so this is very, very relevant in terms of understanding both the audit as well as the documentation. Firstly, when you let's look at what is a smaller and less complex entity. So, this definition is not been there. It came in recently in the ISSB document, where they are working on a separate standard, where India played a role in also coming out. So they come out with a standard on smaller and less complex entities. So what it says is that small entity, so we can divide it into 2 parts. Small entity could be one where you have simple operations. There's one factory, there's, let's say, 1 or 2 customers. But there could be another entity which is, let's say, a startup. You have funding by investors, you have ESOPs, you have overseas sales, you have different combination of financial instruments. So now one needs to decide both small and less complex. So once we have gone past that, then we see what is the audit. So there are no relaxations as far as the audit procedures are concerned, because as we've always maintained, an audit is an audit is an audit, whether it's done for a smaller entity. Yes, maybe the extent of the complexity in the audit procedure or the entity will be lower. From a documentation perspective, in fact, there is guidance which is available at the institute only. So there is a guide for practitioners for audit small entities. It's a checklist based approach which helps in that. But from a relaxation perspective, the standard scalability, there are 2 aspects there. One is that the standard recognizes that if you're auditing a smaller entity, and this is as the SA 230, which does not talk about complex, it talks about smaller entities, where so it recognizes that perhaps the engagement partner will be doing the bulk of the work. There will not be a team which will be involved, and thereby there will not be that documentation in terms of the team discussions or communicating the responsibilities to the team. So the engagement partner, whosoever is doing, will have to document that himself or herself and take responsibility for that. Secondly, there is a leeway given in terms of, because if you look at the standards, there are different stages. You have, as Vijayji also mentioned, in terms of the planning, risk assessment, then you have materiality. All these have to be documented and have to be linked separately. So there has to be a different section. If you look at different methodologies, you look at the guidance which is the institute given. So the leeway which is given is that all this can be compressed and can be at one place. It can be one document where right from the planning to the strategy in terms of a response, materiality and all can be together in one document, and that can be linked to your work procedures which you've done. So to my understanding, this is the only relaxation as far as documentation is concerned.
Yeah, thank you, Sanjay bhai, for clarifying that. Vijay bhai, a question to you, because you talked about the hygiene issues and all those things. Many times at auditors, there is a confusion about what is the extent of documentation that is required to be done, because there are so many aspects that get covered as far as an audit is concerned. So whether things like minutes book of board meetings, general meetings, records, invoices, vouchers, fixed assets, FA register, all these are to be obtained by the auditor and they have to be documented. And second is, what is the retention period for the audit documentation, the audit files?
You hit it on the nail, Vishal bhai, because this has been a constant with the client is, so what information the client will give us for our files and what information they would always say it is confidential. So so based on my experience, few things we need to take care, because you mentioned about this minutes book. So minutes book, a lot of times, clients are resistant to give the minutes book, in which case I think we need to review, because of course the review has to be done. Client can't, refuse us the access to the minutes book. So we can take the notes of what is there in the minutes, because any decision which has been decision or discussion which has taken place in those minutes and which is minuted, our nature, timing and extent of auditing procedures will undergo a change. So for example, something is discussed that we intend to sell this business. Unless we have access to that minutes, our all the disclosures will change. So I'm if there is a large litigation and which is there, if there is any fraud which has happened, and if client refuses the access to the minutes book, that it's not possible. So I'm saying we can take the minutes. Regarding agreements, I think we need to have all the critical agreements in our file. So, for example, there is a shareholders agreement. I think we need to have what are the implications of arrangement between the shareholders. So far as it impacts our nature, timing, and extent of auditing procedure, we need to be mindful. So that is on shareholders. Some a client has made some acquisition or trying to divest something, those agreements needs to be there. If there are any critical vendor or customer, those agreement or some critical terms which impacts the financial statements, I think those agreements needs to be there. Otherwise, I don't think we need to have all the agreements. Regarding invoices, that is vouchers and invoices, that is the next level it comes. So when I see our auditing procedures, when we look at all the processes which impacts the significant accounts, we do first we do the walkthrough of understanding of our process. So for example, order to cash is one of the process which we are looking at. we'll do walkthrough of the different kind of sales which is being done, or different channels of sales, depending on the whatever is the business of the company. Those walkthrough documents has to be there on the file, because that is the basis on which we decide our understanding and determine that what controls needs to be tested. The next level is, then having understood the walkthrough, we devise our auditing procedures, and then we say we test those controls, right? So we'll take a sample and test those controls. To use, ideally it's good to be there on the file, but lot of times it is not there. Test of controls, and then we go to test of details. So those are not there, but the kind of information which gets captured in our file is as if that everything is there, because we need to link all this. So for example, if we are saying procure to pay, we start right from PO. So we link PO, correct, to GRN, to receipt, inward, to invoice, to amount. So I think that the whole linking, all the information which gets captured, so invoice, so GRN can't be before the PO. If it is there, then that's a separate issue. What I'm saying, those we need to link. So it's not a standalone we need to look at. It's good to have those documents in the file, but as I said, a lot of times the clients refuse, so at least walk through those should be there. And another area which always bothers clients is the fixed asset register. And I think we need to educate client that we are saying that the company has maintained adequate records of fixed asset, and for that purpose we need to have that fixed asset register on the file. But if I've missed anything, I'll be happy to I think our archival period and I've already covered in the initial period, but that's where I'm not reporting.
Yeah, fine. So retention period, like you said, Arka, so we have one is the 60 days, which is for the completion of the audit file. From the audience, the question has come about the retention period of the audit documentation.
Okay, so that is 7 years. It is 7 years from the date of sign off. But if we are reporting to any parent company auditors or primary auditors, and that sign off is later date, we need to be mindful of those dates of sign off, and accordingly our audit retention period will get extended, number one. And if we need for any other purpose, then we need to evaluate. But this is 7 years is the bare minimum from the date of signing.
Right. Thank you, Vijay, for answering that. Raghu sir, on the technology, again a question that could you please elaborate on the best practices and procedures that should be followed when storing audit documentation in electronic format to ensure the completeness, the integrity, and accessibility of the audit files? And also, additionally, with respect to the security measures or the software tools that you may recommend for safeguarding the sensitive audit information in digital form. And this sensitivity, we have also got a question from the participant. So I thought I'll take this first.
See, basically, when you're digitizing the audit documentation, as I told earlier, we should ensure that it's accessible to everyone, number one. Number two, confidentiality is maintained because you have teams accessing the data from different locations. We should ensure that there's, confidentiality of the data, and the data should be secure because you're dealing with volumes of data. So, which is very, very critical, and it's essential that the audit documentation, what you're building digitally, because what happens in a traditional audit documentation, you just have a few, copies of the deeds, documents, vouchers, and worksheets, things like that. But when you're looking at having the audit documentation on digital mode, there's a tendency for to have a lot of data of the company to store in your accounting, what you can say, documentation software. So you need to ensure that there's proper access is provided to the right people, security is there, if the data is secure. And earlier I said it should be cloud-based. Here, one thing which I would like to say that, whichever engagement, we are talking about primarily audits of listed companies or audit of large size companies. But what I personally feel, my experience is that audit documentation is just not restricted to audit of companies. Even simple things like, I would like to give you 4 examples. Certifications being done for various purposes, whether it's given to the bank, whether it's being given to for an import or export purpose, whichever authority you're giving a certificate, when we examine, we find that the auditor is not maintaining audit documentation. Cases where we should ensure that documentation is required for every attest function carried out by a chartered accountant. One is certification. Doing a due diligence. You're doing a due diligence on behalf of some company and you issue a due diligence report. And then you say that these many things are not complied by that company. There's a possibility that you might file a legal case against you, saying that the due diligence report that has been issued by you is wrong. So you should be in a position to satisfy the court that yes, we have done this due diligence. This is a basis of which for us to have arrived at the conclusion. Many a time we find that the audit documentation is not maintained by the audit firm. Doing forensic audit. I have been the audit committee of chairman of audit committee of a large public sector bank. When we undertake forensic audits of various major account which have defaulted, and when we see the forensic audit, when we ask for some additional information, we find that information is not forthcoming. So let us say doing a forensic audit engagement also, you should ensure that the right documentation has been kept. So what I would like to say, Vishal Bhai, is that whatever you do, whether it's certification, whether it's due diligence, whether it's a forensic audit, the data that has been kept in your software should be accessible. It's on a cloud-based platform. Everyone should be able to use it, and you should be able to provide it to any regulator at any point of time.
Any special do's and don'ts with respect to the security measures, because it's a sensitive and confidential information of clients that we store, and especially with cloud and all, maybe you can give some tips or guidance to our members.
See, basically, generally what happens in most of the audit firms, once the audit documentation is prepared and then the entire team puts in the audit documentation, it is we are moving to something like a DigiLocker. DigiLocker is something, a new concept where we put all the documents and we have the username and the password held by one partner. So here also what would happen is once the audit is over, once the entire documentation is kept in the software, there'll be some sort of a mechanism to ensure that no one else is able to access the data there. And generally, the person who has signed the balance sheet would have access to the information. So maybe it can be held by one or maybe another one engagement partner. 2 of them can have the access to the audit documentation.
Right. Thank you, sir. Sanjay bhai, Raghu sir mentioned about the engagement partner. So, sir, can you just highlight about how important is the role of the engagement partner, and especially in reviewing the documentation of the engagement?
Sorry. Thank you, Vishal bhai. So the engagement partner is there's a definition provided in SA 220, whereby one, the engagement partner has to be a chartered accountant, member of the institute, has to have the authority, and is entrusted with the responsibility for the final audit and the sign off and provide the report. So engagement partner is a pivotal figure as far as the whole the whole audit process is concerned, and thereby it's we also need to look at, in fact, if you look at recent orders which have come in from NFRA, they've talked a lot about the role of the engagement partner. So let's just take certain aspects for what the standard talks about. So one, as I have mentioned, as far as responsibility, who is going to take the responsibility? So there is, there have been different terms which have been used. There could be signing partner, EQCR. There could be a lead partner, but engagement partner is the one who is actually defined. So there's an engagement letter. So there's the person who signs off the engagement letter. He or she has taken the responsibility for the audit of the sign off and of actually the final conclusion, which is appearing in the audit report. And that does not mean that all the procedures have been done by the engagement partner, but the engagement partner is taking the responsibility of having reviewed the procedures, having asked the the difficult questions to the team, and having maintained professional skepticism, being aware about the trends in the industry, about the business, the challenges, what could go wrong, and then bringing all that knowledge forth to bring forth that conclusion as far as the audit report is concerned. In terms of documenting, the responsibility of ensuring documentation finally is with the engagement partner. The EQCR is only, or the engagement quality control reviewer is looking at that from an independent perspective, and that separate documentation is for the EQCR only in terms of challenging or reviewing the judgments which have been taken by the engagement partner. But the overall responsibility for the audit rests with the engagement partner. Now, as far as the documentation is concerned, the engagement partner does not need to sign every document, but there has to be documentation which needs to provide a comfort to whosoever looks at the documentation. Yes, it was reviewed and there was a conclusion. So what was the basis of conclusion? For instance, we talked about fixed assets verification. So fixed asset verification carried out, there are sheets of fixed asset verification or ledger having been seen. Now, what was the conclusion which the engagement team took? And what were the questions which were asked at this stage, and what was the final conclusion that the engagement partner, he or she concluded that yes, all the audit procedures were carried out and the fixed assets are in agreement. The figures which have been there in the financial statements are in agreement with the books of account, all the evidence and all is maintained. So to that extent, that conclusion should speak that out. So that is what the engagement partner role, and we can talk more about the engagement partner if you look at the NFRA orders. It's in only one case I think I've seen that they have talked about the engagement quality control reviewer very, very seriously, but in all other cases it's been the engagement partner. I hope I have been able to address that issue.
Yes. So Sanjay, what I understand is that the engagement partner is the, I would say, most important person or the person responsible for the audit documentation when it comes to an engagement. Vijay, continuing from there, often we see that documentation, it does not reflect what the engagement team has done. Then as per your experience, where is the gap? And actually, do you agree that, we normally say that whatever is not documented has not been done? Do you agree with that phrase?
Yeah, it's very true. I think over the period, if it is not documented, how can one say that this was done? So our documentation has become a legal documentation, and there, if you look at any legal agreement and the disputes are with comma, full stop, right? Even in the IPO documents, the disputes are with the whole of disclosures. Nobody looks at it, but God forbid something were to go wrong with the issue and the investors lose, everybody will look at with tooth comb and look at the comma, full stop. So audit documentation has become more from a legal perspective. So we cannot say that something which is we have signed off, but there is no evidence of having done the work. And let me give you a couple of examples just to drive home this point, and these are very critical ones. So for example, if the company were to is in a POCM company, right? Now in a POCM company will have the cost incurred, what is the fixed price contract, and what is cost to complete. If we have not done work around cost to complete, the client will give that this is the percentage of completion which has been done, and we have signed off on revenue, which is based on percentage of completion. Now, unless we document that why this is the revenue, and for that we need to start with right from what is the transaction price, what are the performance obligations, what are the completion, what is the balance cost to complete. Unless all this is we have understood, so we have understood the process, we have picked up the sample, based on the sample we have done all this, and accordingly we say that okay, this is the revenue, and which is very significant revenue. I think not documented is not done. It becomes more and more important for the judgments. Otherwise, there would be some invoices, there would be something which is there, which is based on the facts. But when we look at the judgments, this documentation, inherently becomes, higher. But even for, any facts, like, procure to pay or order to cash, if we have not documented any of those items, right? If we have not documented the cutoffs, which is a factual one, I think not documented is not done. So it's very true. We have to think, legally, as far as this is concerned, and that needs to be reinforced. That one can't, even the people change, and the large firms, even the partners change, right? How would somebody, when asked questions, somebody would say that okay, I done.
Right. Thank you, Vijay bhai. Again, Raghu sir, on I would say documentation linked with technology. So the question is that many times we have a lot of version of document and workings and all, because there are corrections and queries and all. So whether incomplete initial drafts or superseded audit work papers, documents, or a trail from such audit work paper to the final audit work paper are to be obtained by auditor and kept as a audit documentation. And also the other way, that what the auditor should not include in the audit documentation. And especially when we talk of technology, and there are so many versions that are floating around.
Very true. Basically, what really happens is when you're building audit documentation, you have so many versions, but what is very important is that you need to understand that, one second. What you need to understand is that the final version is what is very important. The final version of the audit documentation is what is very relevant. The final version of the working paper. So what is recommended is that whoever is creating a working paper, the name of the person who has created that working paper, the date, and the name of the person should be mentioned on every working paper. And he should very clearly say it's the final one. And it's also essential that one more person can review that and he can say this has been reviewed by me. So that can go as a part of the final working audit documentation. So there's no need for us to keep record of incomplete or initial drafts or any other initial papers which we have collected. The final thing is what is very relevant. Here, one thing I would like to add, Vishal bhai, out of my experience, especially when you're dealing with multinational companies, when you're dealing with startups, when you're dealing with subsidiaries of foreign companies, we find that many directors are foreign nationals. And when you ask them for some documentation, we find that documents are provided by them, and the documentation that is provided in many jurisdictions, we have seen that there's no much sanctity for the legal documents there. They just send you some 4-page or a 5-page document, and you're not very satisfied with the quality of the document what you see in, let us say, in India. So many times you need to apply your discretion and find out whether you're convinced with the documentation, especially when looking at recognition of revenue. You have to look into all these documents that has been entered into by the subsidiary with the parent company, and you have to take a decision. So what is very important and critical is for the auditor to use his judgment whether the audit document is adequate. If it's not adequate, he needs to strengthen it by asking for more information. And when you're conducting audit for multinational companies, subsidiaries of foreign holding companies, I think we need to be extra cautious, because many times even the directors, we would not have seen them personally. Everything would happen on Zoom calls. We would have done our KYC, but to a limited fashion. So our responsibility would increase depending on the profile of the client. So finally, what is important is that the final version of the document is what is to be kept on record.
Yes, thank you, sir. I think that would be a very important and key takeaway, that it's just the final version which has to be documented in the audit file.
Right.
Sanjay bhai, we spoke about the completion of audit file, and then there is a time period given of around 60 days. We would request you if you can guide our participants about the completion of the final audit file. What would be the audit documentation in the circumstances where the auditor finds it necessary to modify the existing audit documentation or add new documentation? Or what are the changes which are permissible in the audit documentation during the final assembly process?
Thank you, Vishal bhai. I think it's very clear from the standard that that nothing can be changed. What is an assembly of? One needs to understand what is an assembly of an audit file. The assembly of audit file takes place after the audit procedures have been completed. Your sign off has happened, which means evidence collection has been done before that. So if that concept is understood, I have been speaking about that many times, and practically I think all firms have that challenge in terms of communicating. So there is an audit sign off date, which is your report date. All your evidence would have been your representations, all evidence, let's say your inventory verification, estimates, everything should have been taken before that. They should, and now you have an electronic medium, there will be emails, there'll be, you'll have documents which have been there on the server. So they are all dated. So everything will have to be there, and that has to be there. Now, what is the assembly? Assembly is only that even, you're just putting those things together. There could be certain things like, which was mentioned, there is a something which has to be discarded, there is something which is replaced, so those are things which need to be done. There could be things which need to be just collated or need to be rearranged, so that's, or there is some signing off which is required, so I think those are the only ones which can be done. But when you talk about modification, audit document, only the standard only permits if, let's say, you have something from the regulator. Like, for instance, our experience has been, let's say, a CAG comment, comes in there. There is a change which needs to be made. In that respect, a modification can be made as far as the documentation is concerned. That is where the standard, permits. Otherwise, there is, once it is done, in fact, the standard procedure for this is that your files, if they are in hard copy, then they need to be taken, they need to be stored away after 60 days, and then, or if they're in the soft form, then they need to be archived, so that nothing can be done there. So that 60-day period, after that, in any case, nothing can. But even in that 60-day period, it's only an assembly which can happen. I hope I've been able to address that, Vishal bhai.
Yeah, perfectly. So, sir, like you also mentioned, what I understand is that when we sign off, technically, from a documentation perspective, we should have received all the documents based on which the numbers are being certified or we are expressing our opinion. Thereafter, it is just the final touches which are to be given. So I understand, sir, that even a management representation letter has to be on record before we sign off, right?
Absolutely. In fact, if you permit me 30 seconds, Vishal bhai, there was one comment which I talked about with regard to the going concern, which is very important. And the NFRA has pointed that out, that the letter was received one day before the signing. So they said it's an afterthought, that the signing, because if you need to assess the going concern, then there has to be a period over which it has to be assessed. So I think these are things which we need to be, and again, linking it to the engagement part, partner's responsibility. When you are signing off on that date, the engagement partner needs to ensure that all evidence, because the standard 700 says sufficient appropriate audit evidence. So that has to be ensured at that stage.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, I appreciate, sir, because this is something very important. And especially, the last minute pressures of the deadlines and all. It's important to understand that what are the documentation requirements, considering the date of sign off, pre that and post that. And when we talk of assembly of audit file, it's not that all the documents we would get from the client post the date of sign off. They have to be in our file before we sign off, and then only that would enable us to actually give our opinion on the true and fair view. Vijay bhai, earlier Sanjay bhai mentioned about documentation with respect to professional judgment. Can you give some examples or circumstances where it is appropriate to prepare the audit documentations relating to professional judgment?
I think the most important, as I mentioned earlier, is other areas we will have some evidence, but as far as the professional judgment is concerned, we have to actually conclude. It's not a fact; it is the judgment which comes into play. So, for example, say very simple provision for inventory. Everybody would be facing this challenge as to provision for inventory. Now, what is provision for inventory is a judgment, and the whole documentation around. So first of all, we'll have to understand what is the policies and procedures and controls around it instituted by the management, right? Then we test those controls. And management, each company in the even the same business would have a different way of evaluating and providing for the impairment. So what is the policy of the company? Understand this. Then how this has been applied, that policy. So somebody will say it is based on the aging. Somebody will say it is based on actual identification because I'm able to use it. So long as that policy is reasonable, because we'll have to also conclude it is reasonable, because somebody, client may come and say that I will be able to sell, but it is not getting sold. So idea is that whether it is that judgment is reasonable. So what kind of skepticism which we have demonstrated in arriving at the judgment, and that is something which we'll have to document as to why we feel that, for example, this provision for inventory is fairly stated. How do we say this? How do we ensure that what kind of questions which we have asked the management and what kind of responses which we have received from the management in order for us to conclude that inventory is fairly stated? Now, inventory is something which is there on the books. Let me give you another example, and which also we have on a regular basis is say contingent liability, and a company which has many litigations. How do you ensure? So the first of all, again, you'll have to see what is the process by which the company captures all this litigation. This is not in the books. Inventory is in the books, and hence it is easier for us to evaluate. But contingent liability is not in the books. So what kind of auditing procedure which we need to document to see that, number one, how do we get the complete list? And this is one thing, as I said, this is out of practical experience. First thing we would ask is give us the list of contingent liabilities, because that tends to get missed. And then the evaluation, because not all contingent liabilities are provided, right? Not all liabilities are provided, not all claims are provided. Some claims are provided out of abundant caution, but otherwise, either they are disclosed, or even if they are considered as remote, and it is neither provided nor disclosed. What is the basis? And each and every company, each and every litigation is different, because it is fact based. Even it could be interpretation of law. And hence, how have we come to conclusion that if I would always say PPR, possible, probable, or remote. So possible is, disclosed, probable is provided, and remote is ignored. And in fact, it is lot of times, if it is, you'll get letters from somebody who has put a claim. If it is not there in the financial statements, how have you dealt with, such claims? So idea is that, on the books, outside the books, one has to be very, very clear, and the professional skepticism comes, into play maximum in, this judgment. We cannot take straight what the client has taken, what is the, and if I have time, I can give one more example. Because so one more example is, say, impairment, because these three things, I thought it always comes into play. Is there impairment? Now, what kind of procedures one would do for the impairment? Can we say management is saying, and hence I've taken it on, I'm not providing, correct? So management would have done something. Suppose management has got independent expert. Do we do, first of all, the evaluation of the objectivity and independence of that valuer? Correct. And the competence. So objectivity, independence, and the competence of that valuer, because that is something fundamental. And then what is the basis on which, if you read a lot of times, the valuation reports are signed up, but the DCF, if you see the whole working of DCF, they would have a disclaimer that we have not looked at DCF, we have not challenged the projections. Now that is based on the DCF that the conclusion has been made. So I'm saying that reading that what is coming out, whether the discount rate and the growth projections, right? And there sometimes the growth projections are very aggressive in the initial period, and the discounting is done at a lower rate. So I'm saying all these areas, which is one has to challenge, document, to demonstrate that our judgment is what is there. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Vijay. You covered on important aspects of inventory, impairment, and the contingent liability. And these are the areas where definitely the financial statements or our opinion would definitely get impacted. Raghu sir, one question on balance confirmation, which even we have received from a participant. So, is it mandatory to obtain the balance confirmation with respect to the various parties? If not, whether there are any alternative procedures, and something like whether confirmation of all parties' account balances should be obtained by the management, and a copy should be recorded by the auditor as audit documentation. And if not, then to what extent and in which manner the confirmation is relevant for the audit documentation which is required to be recorded?
Practically, if you see, it is practically, if you see, it is really not possible. Nor does the standards on auditing expect us to, have on record all the account balance confirmations, because the time and cost is quite high, and many times the audits have to be completed on time, and we have issue of completing the audit on time. So it's really not possible for us to obtain a confirmation of balance or all the accounts. But yes, having said this, the auditor should use his judgment where he feels that yes, this particular balance is quite a huge balance. It is material in nature, and it is essential for him to get a confirmation. He has to insist on a confirmation, because that will give him additional comfort. So because external confirmation acts as a much stronger audit evidence, so the auditor has no choice but to ensure that he gets an external confirmation from parties where he has reason to believe that he has to verify it from an external confirmation. So basically, it is not required for us to get for all the confirmation. And if you look into your own experience, many a times we see that opening balances continue in respect of various creditors, debtors, and many a times we realize when we speak to the client, they say, yes, sir, it is pending for a long time. And when you ask them for a confirmation, they say they will get it, and they will never be able to get it on time. These are some issues where you should, as an auditor, take a decision whether it's material, impacting the true and fair the view of the balance sheet, and then decide to what extent you need to get the confirmations from the various balances. So basically, what I would like to conclude is that it depends on the auditor use his judgment to decide whether to what extent he requires confirmation from external vendors.
Yeah, and sir, any thoughts on any alternative procedure? So many times we've seen that the balance confirmations are sought for from the auditor's side, the procedures are followed, but then the response is not there. It's a very low percentage. And then
I don't see any alternative solution for this. It's just that you need to ensure that you start your audit on time, and wherever you feel activities take additional time, maybe those activities should be taken up initially. So when you do your audit plan, maybe areas where you need external confirmations, you need to verify that initially so that you have that adequate time for you to get the feedback from the external party. I don't see any solution for this, Vishal Bhai.
And sir, what I understand, it is not necessary to have the external confirmation as at the year end, right? Because many companies, they start this exercise taking the December cutoff, and especially the large companies, listed companies, which do have a limited review process or procedure for December end. So once that is done, they start the balance confirmation exercise. So even I think for our members also, sir, maybe you can guide that it's not a March end thing which is important, and like you said, something which you have to start well in advance.
I agree with you. It is not required that it should be March. It could be December also. Because to a great extent, if you are able to reconcile the balance as of December, then January to March might not take much time for you to understand whether these are old balances or new balances. I think that should be possible.
Right. Sanjay bhai, in fact, before I come to Sanjay bhai, I would just like to share for the participants that at the CAQ, so we do come out with Did You Know series, which is a question answer form of short important aspects with respect to audit quality, which we release on the Twitter, which is now X. So I would request the participants that you please follow. If you are on X, please follow the CAQ handle, which is CAQ_ICI. And be rest assured that you would get a lot of information with respect to audit and audit quality. And one more thing I would like to share that, yes, you saw the Excel tool on the standards on audit. And let me share, like in Vijay, like in movies, before the end, they show some glimpse that there is going to be something more coming up. So here I would just like to share that we are having our council meeting on 9th and 10th. We are going to release a very, very important utility tool, I would say, on engagement letters. So I'm just giving that hint, and I would request everybody to please watch out for this announcement, and please share your experiences. So Sanjay bhai, can you share some examples of situation where the audit documentation, it played a crucial role in defending the audit work during regulatory inspections or litigation?
Thank you, Vishal bhai, for that question. What we are finding today is the complete opposite, where the media is saddled with so many cases where Yes, I personally had an opportunity, having been part of some regulatory committees. So one case I recall very clearly. This was a company. Obviously, I will not name the company, but the company had gone subsequently into liquidation, and there were. The auditor was questioned in terms of certain aspects. So two aspects I want to just mention, and I remember very, very clearly. So one was so there were loans which were given to group companies, and the issue was with regard to recoverability. I'm not going into utilization and all, but the issue was with regard to recoverability and how the auditor at that stage had opined that the amounts were recoverable. So there were a series of discussions, the files were reviewed and everything. And what the auditor was able to clearly demonstrate, and as Raghu sir talked about balance confirmations. So the auditor had a list of the total, recoverables, advances, everything they had documented very, very clearly. Out of that, they had taken a sample in terms of which were the high value ones, which were the significant ones, which they had circulated for confirmation. the ones which they had, and there was a chart which was available in the audit file. It was documented, it was linked, it was there, it was reviewed, but it was documented by the team, it was reviewed by the engagement partner, signed off. All this discussion, or all this decision which was done, it was there. Finally, what were the results of those confirmations? What was the divergence? And what the engagement team had taken, if there was any divergence, whether it was material, to what extent there was an adjustment which was done, not done, whether it was below that was done, where the confirmations were not received. Also, what were the alternative procedures which were carried out in terms of looking at subsequent transactions? Then how the balance confirmation was received directly, what was the process which was followed, and all that was documented, was available on file, signed off. So that led to a lot of comfort finally, in terms of looking at the fact that the procedures were carried out, and whatever happened to the company, and whatever happened, as far as the final view was taken, I'm not good, but at least that was demonstrated to, and I recall having looked at that file, and I also marveled at the way the structure and the way it was done. The second aspect was on the other thing which came up, which Vijayji mentioned, on the independent expert. And so there was a reliance on an external, on the auditor's expert. So the standards, a commonly misunderstood thing is that a management's expert is an expert, but actually defining what is an auditor's expert, and especially on impairment, valuation having been done by an external expert in terms of evaluation of objectivity, independence, competence, that had been done. So that was challenged to a large extent. The auditors were able to demonstrate that the expert they relied on had the necessary competence, was independent, had been objective. Then they had also documented what were the results they had looked at in terms of that valuation, how they had considered that or not considered that for impairment, and finally everything documented in terms of the final conclusion reached, that where impairment was required, not required, on the basis of this. So these are two aspects where I found that documentation was very helpful to an auditor. In the absence of this, it would have been very, very difficult for them to have defended, having done the audit procedures. So I hope I've been able to bring that out, Vishal.
Yes. I think this was a great examples that you gave, Sanjay bhai, because normally, the I would say the audit firm, they do by oversight or anything to miss out on some important documentation, and also the process of the whole documentation. And so these examples are really very important. So now I will start in the reverse order, and because we are almost we are reaching our time of 1 p.m. that we have to end. And I would have the same question for all the panelists, but we'll start in the reverse order. So first to Vijay bhai. Can you provide a key takeaway to enhance the quality of audit documentation in the firm?
So, as I said in the initial, this, as the importance of, documentation is if it can be discussed in the team planning event and as a part of training process, why this document, why we are doing. I think my experience is, if we don't explain the team why we are doing what we are doing, if that can be explained, I think that one thing is something which is people will start doing. But having said so, one more area, because of now the way consolidation is being done and different auditors are appointed for the components, and more so when the India is companies are going global. The idea, and this is one thing which I wanted to mention when Raghu ji mentioned about the documentation, depends on what kind of documentation the firm has devised. So what methodology the firm is devising. And in this case, if there are some foreign auditors, I'm not sure whether whether the consistency of documentation, because when I'm signing for a global consolidated financial statements, and the component is done outside the country, how do I ensure that there is consistency in that documentation? And if institute can encourage some partnership, I'm not sure whether it is allowed, because local firms may not be a local CAs, Indian CAs. But if something, those accounting firms can be made a partner, and then the sharing of information can be, enhanced. Otherwise, this area is something which we need to focus on. As I said, components are increasing, so the kind of instructions what goes in, it's not something we can. Earlier we would just pick up and add, but what kind of instructions goes, what evaluation what they have done, what kind of participation we have done, communication of materiality. So I think that consistency. So two things. One is, and that's a topic by itself, but I'm saying two things. One is, if we explain the importance to the team, number one, and number two is how have we have consistency in the documentation across all the components. I think these two areas. Otherwise, it always says not documented is not done. And so be ready to go to jail if you say that I've done it, but I've not documented.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Vijay, for those key takeaways. Sanjay, over to you for your key takeaways on improving the audit quality for documentation.
Thank you, Vishal. I'll just pick on what I had said about mindset, and also what Vijay Bhai has consistently been saying in terms of sensitizing team members. So I'll talk from a practical experience. So we also realize in our firm that there were challenges as far as the expectation of partners as well as the team members. So we had an open house where we talked about what is happening as far as the regulatory expectation today is concerned, how that is impacting what is the expectation as far as required from the auditors, and how it links to the work which is being done at the ground level at every stage, and sensitizing team members in terms of the importance of the standards, and exactly what Vijay Bhai was saying. So that effort has at least helped link the audit process, not just to a mundane ticking or checking. I mean, we still have a long way to go, but at least a start has been made in terms of seeing what is the final output and how the team members are playing a role in achieving that final objective or opinion. And then combining that with an ongoing training, looking at where it's required, supplementing with the documentation and checklist, and also moving to the right audit documentation software. So these are some of the things which I would feel in terms of achieving but again, on documentation software, I think what Raghu sir said in terms of the right software, all those technology aspects which need to be kept in. So my sense is involvement of team, looking at the larger picture, and also there's a lot of, I would say, negativity in terms of audit today, but we should provide a more positive kind of atmosphere that, okay, these are tools, these are guides, these are helpful in terms of doing a better quality audit. It is possible, and if you're doing that, you are definitely above board. So that can go a long way in ensuring documentation and better quality audits. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay Bhai. And I would just endorse that even at the CAQD, that is what is our objective collectively, that we provide all these tools, checklists and all, by which the confidence of members as far as the audit documentation is concerned, it increases, and therefore it gives a very positive environment for the audits, as well as I would just like to share that even on the materiality, we mentioned about the risk of material misstatement. At the Center for Audit Quality, and I hope that everybody would agree that this materiality computation is something which is very challenging, and many of the firms, they are not able to actually zoom down on a number about what is the materiality threshold. And at the CAQD, we have worked on an Excel tool with the help of Sri Priyaji, Karunaji, and the whole team, where if you follow a stepwise process, you are able to come to a number which is the entity level materiality, and which would help as a supporting documentation with respect to your audit report and your audit working papers and everything. So I would say that at CAQD also, it has been our objective and endeavor that we provide all these tools and checklists for our members. The final word from our past president, sir, Raghu sir. Sir, about your key takeaways for the participants to enhance the quality of audit documentation in their firms.
I think all of us, all the participants should keep in mind that quality audit documentation is very important, because what is important is not completing the audit and collecting your fees, ensuring that you are able to convince any regulator at any point of time. Today, the expectations of the regulators are very high, whether it is RBI, whether it is SEBI, whether it's IRDA, whether it's the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, whether it's the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, whether it's the ED, whether it's the CBI, whether it's various courts. I think stage you can be questioned, you can be summoned, you might be asked to produce documentation. And I think this is what is important for every practicing chartered accountant to keep in mind, is that he has to keep in mind that the importance of audit documentation, because he is answerable to many regulators tomorrow. I think if we are able to keep this in mind, we're able to create that spirit in the team that this is very important for the firm, for the health of the firm, for the growth of the firm. And a proper data room is created when one person is made responsible to see that audit documentation is built from day one. I think it's not very difficult. It can be achievable. Only thing, we need to have a plan to create a data room where all relevant information relating to the audit, one person is made in charge to ensure that everything is done. So by the time the audit is completed, you have complete information available, and which will be useful to you whenever you want to provide this to any regulator. So what I would like to say is that it's an effort that each one of us have to put, as Sanjay rightly said, Vijay Bhai also said. I think each one of us should understand the importance of this, because if you get stuck in one particular situation, I think that's very, very unfortunate for any, because I've seen many successful professionals, some point of time, for various reasons, they get stuck in one case with one regulator, and the entire professional life goes for a toss. So all of us should keep in mind that it's essential for us to have high quality audit documentation to see that you are safe when discharging your professional duties.
Right, sir. In fact, if you ask my personal view, I would like this webinar to still continue, maybe for at least another 1 hour, with the type of deliberations that are happening. But there are a lot of questions on my plate also, and from that we have received from the participants. But one thing, as the saying says, that all good things have to come to an end, and I would say so does this webinar. And it's been a very interesting session, and I think very, very useful for all the participants about the audit documentation and what are the important aspects, and especially also with the completion of the audit files. And I hope and expect that all the participants have gained from this. I would now request the Deputy Convener, Sri Priyaji, to give her closing remarks and also offer a vote of thanks.
Thank you so much, Vishal Bhai, and I think we are slightly running ahead over on time. But so I'd like to just conclude with one very powerful statement that Vishal Bhai had made, and which was reiterated. If it's not there on your paper and in your document, you've not done the work. So that's, I think, what a message has to pass on to the entire organization. And doing something later just doesn't work. Either you've done it as you're doing it, or it doesn't get done at all, which is what we've seen. So immensely grateful to every single panelist today, to Raghuji, to Vijayji, to Sanjay Vasudevaji, and to our convener, Sri Vishal Doshi, and of course to Karuna, who's put in an enormous amount of work. I must mention, we got a mail from her at 12 last night on a set of a new tool that we are working on. And I think that's really exemplary commitment. And I was sort of very surprised to see a mail come in so late night. But I think it's this kind of effort that actually moves things. I mean, everybody is today 24/7, and I think ICI should be no different. So thank you very, very much once again for all this phenomenal effort in making this happen. And I'm told we have a record number of participants today. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Raghu sir. Thank you, Sanjay bhai. Thank you, Vijay bhai.
Thank you.
Thanks, Priya ji. Thank you. Thank you, Karuna.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Nidhi,
Good afternoon, ma'am.
good afternoon. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Meet
It's okay.
करें फिर फोन पे बात करते हैं. Thank you, Manish.